Dan Keldsen here, and today we are going to be talking about context and user experience design. I've been following usability and user experience design concerns for about 20 years. I'm very happy that I stumbled on to caring about that, and coming from an enterprise background, I'm horrified at how bad most enterprise user experiences are for employees, and that often trickles out into consumers, although consumers clearly get more of a focus. I'm trying to pull the consumer focus back into enterprises, or into enterprises for the first time, and make sure that we can leverage the best things that are being done regardless of where they happen. This is a kind of common theme on what I talk about and work on. And here I want to take an example from the music industry, and Spotify in particular. But first, some history. So it seems like it was just yesterday, but the original iPhone was introduced on June 29th, 2007. That was a long time ago. And then it took about a year for the iPhone App Store to be introduced on July 10th, 2008. And there have been billions of dollars worth of applications sold on the iPhone App Store and other similar app stores. It was a whole revolution that at this point has been 11 years out in the wild, which is amazing because this did not exist, and it changed the entire phase of how mobile development was done for sure. And it has certainly trickled into software as a service in many other areas. But 2007, 2008, iPhone and the iPhone App Store, that was a long time ago. And yet, even companies that do have mobile apps, and it's the vast majority of ones that want to be successful anyhow, especially large enterprises, they are not taking full advantage of the context that people use smartphones in. And it's not just a single context. Where you're using, you can be using your smartphone anywhere, right? But that doesn't mean that the interface should be the same. So let me peel into that a little bit. I've used this for years. I taught a workshop that I designed called the Proving Ground for Taxonomy and Information Architecture. That was in the early 2000s. I delivered hundreds of workshops on this. And I would keep coming back to this. You want to design an experience and build an information architecture that supports it, that keeps in mind the content, because most of the consulting that I did at that time was around enterprise content management or knowledge management, things like that. Not necessarily e-commerce sites. So there's the content. What do you have for the raw materials? The community, the people that are going to be using it. It could be more than one community, like partners or a call center versus line of business, employees at headquarters versus people out in a store, for example. And the context. And normally in the context, what I'm talking about is what are they trying to do when they go into whatever this experience is? Are they trying to find their role? It's typically role-based. So what is their role? They are a salesperson. They're in marketing. They are in somewhere in the supply chain. They're in the warehouse. They're the CFO. They're in finance. They're in the legal department. What is it that they're actually trying to do in that role? But more recently, I still think that's very powerful, but more recently I've come to realize that the intersection there is really about the experience, and that experience can change. So the context is not purely about what's your role and what are you trying to do in that role, but where are you doing it, when are you doing it, how are you doing it, and those can all be very different, as it turns out. So I'm going to use a consumer example, and this will be Spotify. So these days, if you have a car, most people have Bluetooth-enabled car radios, and that lets you bring Spotify, Apple Music, whatever your favorite streaming service is, however you consume music or podcasts, etc., with you away from the home or the office. So if you're used to Spotify at the gym, then you're familiar with this interface probably, or wherever you happen to use it normally, walking to work or on the train or however you consume music and podcasts. And you might notice that there are relatively small text and controls. The screen resolution of an iPhone is quite high. That was one of the big differences from phones that existed before the iPhone, and it actually looked fake to a lot of people. So small text and controls, which makes sense because if it's in your hand and you're walking, you're sitting at your desk, whatever, you have the time and you can read that easily. But what happens if you're driving? You should probably focus on the road. So this is an interesting recent change in Spotify. When Spotify connects to a car radio with Bluetooth, it switches to driver mode. And if you see the first and third photo there, that's the normal interface for Spotify when you're not driving. And it switches because it has detected that it's connected to a car radio using Bluetooth. You could say it dumbs down the interface, but it really strips it down to remove all the sort of distracting aspects. Do you really need to see the cover art when you're driving? Probably not. You can always get out of this mode if you wanted to, but for the most part, the basic functions that you're going to be using for Spotify, they remove all the distractions because you should stay focused on driving, and yet you can still get to everything you need, and it's bigger so that at a glance you can look over, stab the right button if you need to, if you don't have steering wheel controls, among other things, and go on about your life safely. So that context switch, what I think is really interesting is it's done automatically. You as the user don't have to do anything. If you were listening to music before you got into your car, and then you plug it in for charging at least, and want to continue to listen to the same thing, it automatically switches context for you, the screen experience, because it detected that you have switched context and you don't have to do anything at all. That is a very simple detail, but that kind of nuance is exactly, to me, what great UX design is all about. So for you, are your user experience designs context aware? What are ways that you could help your users in their context? And are you sure that you've actually kind of explored the sort of non-obvious context that they might be using whatever interface it is that you've designed? I'd love to hear what you're doing or what you're thinking about doing in this area. If you could please comment below and stay tuned for more. I would love to hear from you, and stay tuned for more.